Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening and taking the time to spend with us. We're so excited, Mothers Out Front with Rachel Carson Council, together bringing you this event centering care, a virtual conversation on health, climate, and frontline communities. All right. So at Mothers Out Front, our mission, we build the power of moms and caregivers by organizing them to take action and transform unjust systems so all children live, play, and learn in a healthy climate. Our vision for Mothers Up Front is we're building a world where all children can live in a healthy environment and our communities have the power to shape our futures. Oh, just a quick housekeeping. If everyone could go ahead and put themselves on mute. Thank you so much. So what we do at Mothers Out Front, we build relationships, build community, we do educational events, we contact decision makers, we tell our stories, and we participate in rallies and actions. So with that, I would now like to introduce our panel moderator, Joy Reeves, who is the Director of Policy and Strategic Development at the Rachel Carson Council.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Joy from the Rachel Carson Council. And for those who haven't heard of us, we are the legacy organization of Rachel Carson, founded in 1965 by her closest friends and colleagues. And our mission is to carry on her legacy as a national nonprofit focused on youth advocacy, awe, wonder, and environmental policy. More specifically, these are kind of the three pillars of what we do. We have our policy and advocacy arm, our education and engagement arm, which includes a robust campus network and youth fellowship program, and our storytelling and stewardship program, trying to keep the legacy of Silent Spring and powerful environmental writing alive today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So just quickly, our agenda for today, we're going to start out with a lightning panel discussion. We've got three amazing panelists that we're going to talk to. And then we're going to move into a portion, a how-to letter to the editor, where you're going to get some more info on how to be able to do that yourself. And then we'll even have some time for practice. Just quickly going to go through our norms for our time together this evening. As previously stated, please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Come as you are. We always encourage people when we have our events, whether it's kids, pets, meals and snacks, all are welcome and expected and included here. We're here to support each other, so please be respectful. Feel free to use the chat and the Q&A tab. Please share reactions, questions, and if anything is resonating with you this evening. As we're getting into the panel discussion, we do ask that you put your questions in the Q&A tab instead of raising your hand, and we'll hold those questions if we have time at the end. And now I'm going to pass it back to Joy to introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you again to our lovely audience for tuning in. Um, it's my honor to introduce our three panelists. I will go in order, starting with Layla. Layla Gadd is a 2025 RCC National Environmental Leadership Fellow. Currently, she's in her second year of her MPH at the Columbia Mailman School of Public Health in the Environmental Health Sciences Department with a certificate in Health of an Aging Society. Her interests focus on extreme heat and aging and how social programs can be put into place to better support those aging alone during an extreme climate event. This summer, Layla visited various senior centers across the city to host workshops on heat-related illness prevention. For her RCC project, Layla is working with assisted living facilities in Arizona to assess their emergency preparedness for extreme heat events. Next, we have Manushi Sharma. Manushi is from the Himalayan region of Uttarakhand, where the culture deeply honors the inextricable connection between people and nature. This early wisdom shaped her journey as a public health and environmental justice strategist with over a decade of experience across the UN, governments, and grassroots movements. She currently serves as co-lead of the environmental justice team at the U.S. Partnership for Education for Sustainable Development. And their youth arm is called Change the Chamber, a really amazing organization. Manushi, I will let you drop links and resources in the chat for Change the Chamber. Manushi is also a nature-inspired watercolor artist, using her creative practice to reflect on the emotional and ecological dimensions of justice and healing. Thanks, Manushi. Finally, we have Susan. Susan Summer is the co-coordinator of the Massachusetts State Campaign Team at Mothers Out Front. She is bilingual in Spanish and is a retired women's health nurse practitioner. Susan worked in a Boston neighborhood health center for 16 years prior to helping to establish and lead the Boston's Children's Hospital Community Asthma Initiative in 2005 until her retirement in 2022. The Community Asthma Initiative became a national model for pediatric asthma home visiting programs that included both home environmental assessments and trigger remediation, but also comprehensive asthma education and case management to address the many socioeconomic factors that contribute to asthma health disparities. Panelists, thank you for being here, and I will go ahead and kick off our lightning panel, which unfortunately, because of our time constraint, will be kind of a flash talk format. No need to fill, 10 minutes per answer, but we're all really looking forward to hearing from you. And I'll kick us off just in order. I guess we'll start with Layla, but I want each of you to answer this question. Who or what are you caring for in your life right now, in family or in community?
Hi, everybody. First, I just want to say thank you so much for attending, and thank you, Joy, for that wonderful introduction. And I thought about this question for a while, and the first thing that came to my mind was about the recent snowstorm. And personally, my grandma lives alone. So with all this, like with all the snow piling up, the one thing that my grandma enjoys doing is going to the library. So over the weekend, I went to the library to bring her books, and so we can talk about them. And one thing my grandma really loves reading about is Mount Everest, which I think is sort of fitting with the weather right now. So that's what we're doing together.
That's really lovely. Thank you. Manushi, how about you?
Well, I'm back home after 5 long years, so I'm enjoying time with my family, also taking care. I also had this little art and sip sesh with my mom, which was very bonding, and we discussed so many things. So I'd say I'm taking care of my parents right now.
Thank you, Manushi. How about you, Susan?
Well, I'm a mother of two adult children and also a grandmother of a 16 months old, which is very joyful, Maggie. And in addition to Mothers Out Front, I'm a member of a secular Jewish social justice organization, Boston Workers Circle, which was founded as a mutual aid society in 1900 by Jewish immigrants. And so we carry on the traditions of labor and anti-racist social activism, and also music. And we've been showing up on picket lines and anti-ICE rallies. So that's how I sort of take care of my community.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question that pivots towards your work on asthma specifically. In your work supporting families with asthma, how did you see climate or environmental conditions shaping children's health?
Sure. First, pediatric asthma is probably ground zero for the effects of climate change on health. Young children breathe at a faster rate at a time when their lungs are still developing, increasing the harm caused by exposure to air pollutants like methane and particulate matter from cars and trucks. Extreme heat is also especially dangerous for young children due to their faster metabolism as well as an asthma trigger. So as you said, I was a clinical director of a pediatric asthma home visiting program in Frontline communities in Boston. We visited families whose children had been seen in the ER or hospitalized for asthma, and about 90% of the families we served were people of color, primarily African American and Latinx. The beauty of community health is that you can have an impact beyond the individual patient while building trusting relationships with families and communities over a long period of time, often years. Two community health workers and I were able to visit families in their homes and sit for an hour or more to talk about what's going on, not only with the child's asthma and medications, but also other stressors that affect a family's health, including substandard housing, which was certainly the biggest motivation for family participation. And we also learned about food insecurity, job insecurity, lack of health insurance, all the effects of structural racism that impacted their lives. And these social determinants of health are known to actually have much more impact on someone's health than what takes place in a medical visit. So in this context, climate change affects children in environmental justice communities far greater, um, uh, children with asthma, and they have 3 to 5 times higher rate of hospitalizations and ER visits than white children. So the program was really designed to address both the indoor air quality issues which they experienced as well as outdoor air quality. And in regards to outdoor air quality, I was also able to testify before the Boston City Council at the request of an EJ organization in regards to the effects of diesel emissions on children with asthma.
Thank you so much, Susan. I think you especially spoke to the importance of relational listening and learning, in addition to the very clear environmental justice data that's out there. Um, Manushi, following up on that justice component, what does effective environmental justice advocacy look like at the intersections of science, policy, and lived experience?
Course. I think that's a loaded question, but I'll just try and chip off of it. So I'd say making science accessible that I found, and it's been a huge learning for me at Change the Chamber as well, to how to not dilute science, but make it accessible in terms that people understand. And this goes beyond just simplifying jargon, but it's also about redistributing power and expertise, moving beyond the binary of expert versus non-expert, but actually including the communities that are at the front lines and are being affected. So this might look like involve like building local capacity to do, actual research. So maybe participating with the community members or groups or having identifying those champions in the communities that have this appetite, and then they're able to share these findings with the communities. In my current workplace, I'm in the process of setting a community review panel where we, once the study is produced, we take it into a brief format and then we review it with the community members to see, because these are crucial environmental health topics. So say, even if you're issuing an extreme heat advisory, or you're telling something about lead poisoning, or you're saying something about co-exposures that lead and plastic together are super, super harmful, but why? So I'm setting up this community review panel to sort of discuss with them that what makes sense in this study to you, what is that thing that will trigger that behavior change? What is that thing that you need from us as the scientific community to supply you with more information so that you can, create sustainable practices? Um, this would be like a very quick 2-second answer from me.
Thank you, Manushi. Yeah, it's really valuable to use community knowledge to help fill in those gaps that exist in systems of healthcare and weather preparedness and all those intersections. With that, Layla, what gaps have you seen in caregiving systems when it comes to protecting older adults during extreme heat events?
Yeah, so my answer is actually going to build off of the past two answers, and it's personal experience that I've had in the field as well as things that I've read in my literature reviews. So firstly, I think a really important thing about caregiving systems, especially when we talk about older adults, is to consider that many people are being serviced by informal caregivers, which means that their family member or a friend is, I think it's almost like 40 million older adults are being serviced by an informal caregiver. So this segues into a really important point that there's a lack of training and there's a lack of tools for these caregivers. Since they're not formally considered a caregiver, they're not being trained actively and accurately to deal with complicated situations like extreme heat waves. When I would go into the senior centers to host my workshops, a lot of the time the caregiver would come because they're the person who helps the older adult make it to the center. And it was the first, and I would ask the caregiver, like, candidly, have you received any information about this or any formal training? Is there a training for you? Even like the nurses that they would come with. And all of them would tell me no, that they weren't briefed or educated on how to support an older adult when there's an extreme heat wave. And then even with assisted living facilities, again, it's sort of the same idea. They're sort of left out of this standardization that hospitals or even larger healthcare systems are following because they tend to be private residences and you can't really govern those kinds of places. So when it comes to caregiving systems, especially when it's family and community based, there's just so much lack of training and tools, and it's not lack of interest from the community, sort of like Manisha was saying, where there's experts and non-experts. It's more of just there's just nobody to translate this research and all of these findings that we have to them. And in most cases at the workshops, as I was saying, I was the first time that these caregivers were even hearing resources that New York City had for the older adults that they were caring for and servicing.
Thank you so much, Layla. Being a caregiver, whether formal or informal, is definitely a sacred thing, and I hope that we can catch up the resources to the practice of caregiving. Um, this next question is a bit of a pivot, and I would encourage everybody in the audience to think on this one for yourself too, and feel free to chime in the chat. But I guess we'll start with Layla. We'll go reverse order. Was there a moment when climate change felt personal to you, not just abstract?
I think a really good example of this, or to answer your question, is I used to do home visits when I was volunteering with the senior center on the Upper West Side called DeRote. And I would go, and the reason I was going was because I was helping older adults learn how to use Zoom or like learn how to program their laptops. And I remember it was the middle of the winter, and it was one of those like really, really cold days like we're experiencing now. And I walked into this older lady's like apartment, and she was literally in a tank top and shorts, and she was dying in sweat, like she was sweating so much. And I remember asking her like, oh my God, I'm so cold, like how are you, like why are you so hot right now? And she was explaining to me like that the radiator in her apartment was set so high, and that it actually forced her to stay inside most of the time because it was such a like strong or like grave weather temperature change from going like from an 80-degree apartment outside to like uh 30 degrees, that she just ended up staying in a home and inside. And then during the summer, she said that her apartment was always hot, so she was always living in heat. And it was this, I was going for a completely other like reason, technology help. And that sort of made me realize climate change is it's more than just carbon emissions. It's more than just saying like, if you guys have seen that movie, The Day After Tomorrow, it's more than these grave, serious climate events. Your neighbors may be experiencing things, even just with their heat and central air. Uh, yeah, I really love that movie. Heat and central air systems, that made me really realize, there needs to be more work and education done, and people just telling these stories of these older adults who live alone, who their only visitor may be me the whole week.
Thank you, Layla. Um, Manushi, go ahead.
Um, so it's, you know, uh, back home, like I'm from the Himalayan region, and so I don't think like we were experiencing climate change way before it became glamorous enough for the UN to discuss it. But while we didn't have the verbiage for it. So in so many ways, I've seen the climate become unsustainable for the crops that were grown. So our nutrition has changed. The we've lost so many livelihoods to extreme weather events up here. So people would migrate. I'm one of those immigrants where I was in the US for the past 4 or 5 years. And so it was only till like I think my breaking point was sort of COVID, where not only did I see COVID ravaging my state and my people, but also there were forest fires, there were glacial floods, and there were cloud bursts. And that's when that extreme and it wasn't a one-off event. It was series of extreme events was that it's no longer that future threat. It is right here, and we've perhaps been living it for the longest time, but did not have the resources or the verbiage to, label it that this is what is happening.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, Manushi. And finally, we'll go to you, Susan.
Sure. Well, actually hadn't been involved in climate work until I retired. And when I did, I really began to put the pieces together and could see that, climate activists and public health workers were really working on the same issues in terms of air quality and other environmental conditions that impact families where they live, work, and play and lead to poor health. And I also came to understand asthma from an environmental justice perspective, since I could see that the people who suffered the most from climate change and asthma were the poor and people of color, both in the US and worldwide, and that the fossil fuel industry was driving many of the worst air quality and economic conditions that people suffered. And for all the immigrants who I had been taking care of for so many years, it just put it in a whole different context.
Thank you, Susan. That definitely connects to the Make Polluters Pay theme that we'll bring up again later in our workshop portion. Really excited to get to that. I have one more quick round of questions. And Susan, I'll ask you a follow-up question to kick us off. What wisdom do caregivers and public health workers carry that the climate movement should learn from?
Well, I think again that we everything is interconnected, and we see that people's health is connected to where they live. People are need the tools to deal with climate change, and public health workers are often the um, people on the ground who are able to, address I really related to Layla's description of going into a really incredibly hot apartment. And our program was able to, for example, to provide air conditioners for families because, over time it was just becoming unbearable. So I think that, working together across disciplines is, by far the most important work we can do.
Definitely. And building off of that, Manushi, do you see any large gaps in the climate health communication space? And how can advocates help to fill those gaps?
Of course, I think I'll jump up what Susan said in saying that we're not humanizing the issue. We're not talking to people who are facing these issues, like Susan said, like people who are facing these issues, they're displaced, they lose their livelihoods. Somebody in the chat put in that they had to go into preterm labor. This is what is climate change, beyond science. This is how you're experiencing it. I think the other thing that I see more and more people becoming aware is this future threat framing of climate change. Well, no, not anymore. I'm sorry. I don't even know how to engage with those. That's something I struggle with to engage with those conversations. If anybody in the chat has any advice, please tell me. And the disconnect between the symptoms and the cause, people are experiencing climate health impacts, don't connect them necessarily to climate change. Some might know that their kids' asthma is worse, but not link it to the longer pollen season or increased air pollution, you know. So advocates can help by maybe creating visual timelines showing like, look, this is how it has been for the past 2, 3 years or 5 years. I think we can get clear trends at this point for the past 5 years, how at longer pollen seasons and asthma, are interconnected. And then cumulative and compounding impacts get lost. Like I was saying, that heat is not separate from air quality, or you're not experiencing one climate impact at a time. It is happening all at once. And indoor climate health is, as Lala was saying, mostly invisible. And that for me, it matters so much because how your workplace is built, that matters. How, what housing are you living in? And also then that also gets into the structural questions. What kind of housing is accessible to you as, I don't know, based on your economic background, based on your race, based on your gender, etc. And then also missing that role. I feel like what healthcare workers can play and the healthcare system can play, like healthcare system itself contributes to emissions, I think tackling that, but then at the same time having healthcare providers as advocates of climate change. So for instance, doctors that wield influence in a community saying that, hey, you know, check the AQI, as it should be as common as you applying sunscreen when you leave the house, would be, as simple as that. And then also like who's that trusted messenger? Like there's a lot of mistrust with the government. So how are we, what at a systems level, who is your trusted messenger? So like if the government is saying there is no climate change, is that the truth? What about critically questioning that? But then again, it's layers and layers of miscommunication, misinformation, disinformation, peddled through years and years that takes very long to undo.
Agreed. It'll be a matter of seeing the evidence of our eyes and ears and bodies from climate change. 'Cause we're already
And we are
experiencing.
seeing it. We
Yeah,
are experiencing it. It might not be that huge, and God, I hope it's not at a population scale, but we are seeing it.
definitely. Thank you for those insights. And finally, Layla, we'll have you wrap us up. How should public health training and process evolve to prepare communities for increased climate stressors like heat waves?
I think my co-panelists did a really great job sort of segueing to my question. And I think it's really rooted, especially with with risks like heat waves, that they're invisible. It isn't like a visible climate event, like I've been saying this whole time. You can't really see the impacts of a heat wave like you can see the impacts of a wildfire or a hurricane. Even when we report about heat waves in public health settings, the imagery that we use doesn't really apply, like match up to the actual danger of the heat wave. Sometimes I'll see like public health reports that are about like how many people passed away during a heat wave, and then the image is like an open fire hydrant and like people standing by an open fire hydrant like playing around. And like this doesn't really correlate to what we're seeing. So stressing the importance that there are invisible risks, whether that's in your home or outside. Secondly, I come from an institution that's very research focused. Columbia is a very research focused institution, and we do a lot of great work on heat waves. We're in and we're located in an environmental like justice neighborhood, and none of that research is being translated to community members. They don't know like the great research we're doing because nobody's telling them. So research is important. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not like one of those like anti-intellectualism people. I'm just saying that we're doing all of this research, but it shouldn't be that like when I was going into the workshops, like when I was going into the senior centers, I shouldn't have been hearing from like the center leads that this was the first time like a public health student approached them to teach something or to give a workshop on something. And I think that also just goes back to empowering yourself as a young person to feel like, yeah, I can be an expert on a topic and I can go out and spread knowledge. And I think that's something I'm still working on, definitely for sure. Um, but yeah, just being in a research-focused, research-centered institution, it really makes you see that there we're doing so much work, but nobody's understanding. And then when there's funding cuts happening, you really see what's prioritized. Is it the research or is it telling the community that this research, like, or telling the community that this research is being done? In most cases, it's the research, right? Like we're
Mhm.
thinking, how can we make sure that these high level researchers keep their grants? We're not thinking like, how do we make sure that the participants who are sometimes, might be relying on the compensation they get from being part of our research, how are they being included? And this is all just to say that, especially with invisible risks, like heat waves, those kinds of communities can fall through the cracks because there's nothing, sometimes there isn't anything visual to show for it. Um, so yeah, I really think that education is the most important thing. Putting funding into buddy programs and community-based centers is the most important thing we could do.
Definitely. Manushi, do you have a comment or follow-up?
Yes. Yes. I quickly wanted to add a follow-up sort of thing that I forgot to say when you asked me the first question on how can we bridge that science to policy and advocacy gap. I think incentivizing advocacy, as a researcher, my H index matters a lot, like how many times has my published research been cited. I think if there was a metric that said how many times have communities or something your research being translated into communities, that should also, I'm not saying replace it with the HNX, but I'm saying incentivize advocacy in a way that we're measuring those metrics, and that should that should really have good impact.
100%. That's why we're here. That's why we're gathered for the advocacy workshop right after this. So I think you really hit the nail on the head. Huge thank you again to all of our panelists. I think we have maybe a couple minutes if anyone has a pressing question, but I'll pass it to you, Liz, to either open up that question period, field questions, or move right into the Polluters Pay briefing as you see fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Joy, and thank you so much, panelists, for your expertise in bringing it to this event this evening. It doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat. Look. Yep. But feel free, if you have any questions that come up, maybe as we continue talking, please feel free to still drop them in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen and we'll continue on. Okay. So as Joy had mentioned, something that Mothers Out Front and Rachel Carson Council both can get behind is the campaign of Making Polluters Pay. For more than 50 years, the fossil fuel industry has known about climate change and how they've contributed to it. Instead of informing the public and working in tandem with scientists and governments to slow it down, they took a page from Big Tobacco's handbook and launched campaigns, casting doubt on the science, and took to greenwashing their products and blocking climate solutions at every turn. Now, the effects of climate change, including extreme weather, are costing Americans billions of dollars every year in damages. And as we can see and heard from our panelists, jeopardizing our health in really large ways. So, how do Make Polluters Pay laws work? We win when we organize to shift policy like climate superfund laws, so holding fossil fuel polluters financially responsible for climate damage. Insurance subrogation laws, allowing insurers to recover climate disaster costs from polluters. Local, state, and tribal government lawsuits from communities that demand accountability for climate harm. We need to make sure Congress doesn't bend to corporate pressure and give the fossil fuel industry immunity. One way we can do that is writing letters to the editor to bring issues into public conversation and show lawmakers that constituents support holding fossil fuel companies accountable. Now I'll pass it off to Diego Tovar, Director of Campus and Civic Engagement at the Rachel Carson Council.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. And once again, thank you for such a wonderful panel, y'all. It was just so interesting to learn about your amazing work, and it's so inspiring. And thanks for moderating, Joy. Hello, my name is Diego Tovar, and I'm the Director of Campus and Civic Engagement at the Rachel Carson Council. And I help with all civic action and advocacy organizing on colleges and universities and surrounding areas for the RCC. So if you're connected to campus work in any shape or form and are interested in connecting or collaborating down the line, please think of me past this event. And tonight, I'm so excited to talk to you about the power of the letter to the editor. So the letter to the editor is one of the most accessible tools you have to shape public conversation on a large scale. So I'll be giving a brief overview on letters to the editors, and then we're actually going to share some great resources and begin formulating our own letters. So what is a letter to the editor, or an LTE? An LTE is a short written response to a specific article. It could be a headline or an opinion piece that has already been published by a news outlet. So LTEs are brief by design. They're usually around 150 to 250 words, and you're entering an ongoing public conversation with a focused point. So the purpose of an LTE is simple but powerful. So LTEs allow readers to either add a missing perspective, it could be to correct misinformation or oversimplification. It could be to reinforce or challenge an argument that's circulating. And it's also a way to bring lived experience or community insight into the public record. So, at their best, LTEs are how community members influence narratives, shift framing, get attention of public officials, and make sure important truths don't go unchallenged. In even just a short amount of space of 150 to 250 words. So when we think about our letters to the editors, I want you to imagine yourself as a tree in a forest. So where there is surrounding wind and you have deep anchored roots. The purpose of an LTE is to move conversation, so that's the wind, and then anchor your ideas, which are the roots. So the wind side is what stirs the atmosphere and scatters the leaves. It's sparking the debate, the shifting of perspectives, bringing in that fresh lens to an issue. And then the LTE also needs the roots, which is how you ground your conversation, whether it be through your personal story, through a community story, through data you have, through statistics, through lived experience, through a personal anecdote. And that gives readers something to hold on to combine both that wins and roots elements. Next slide, please. So let's talk about how do we actually write an LTE. So first is you should respond quickly. So letters work best when they're written and submitted within around 24 to 48 hours, 72 hours is okay, but editors are looking for relevance. Second, reference the article immediately. Your opening sentence should mention the article title, the author, the date. This signals to editors that you're responding to a timely piece. And when we practice shortly, you're going to get a nice template and a good guide for how to do this. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to structure this in a cohesive format. You're going to get that soon. And third is make a clear point. So LTEs are short and you don't have room for multiple arguments. So pick one and back that up. Use your roots once you figure out what your argument is to provide that fact, that lived experience, that example. And finally, close with impact. Your ending should leave the reader and the editor with a new perspective or a call to action or what your point is of adding to the conversation and bringing in your unique angle. So if you remember anything else from this slide, remember that clarity of a central argument beats out listing as many points without specificity. So really try to clarify a key central argument. Next slide, please. Like I mentioned, with winds and roots, the wind stirs the atmosphere. So wind you can think of as like momentum. And your job is to show exactly what you're responding to and where you stand immediately. So ask yourself what needs to be challenged, what needs to be clarified or reinforced in the public article or public opinion piece that you're responding to. Where can you stir the air? Next slide. And roots is where that credibility comes. So you want to ask yourself, what truth or experiences must be grounded here for this letter to matter? And that could look like adding that key fact or correction, your data, your lived experiences, a moral or community perspective, all that great stuff that adds that unique take to your main argument. Next slide, please. Your ending matters more than you think as well. This is where you reconnect to your thesis or your main point and leave the editor with a reason to hit publish. So you might reaffirm your main point, offer a concise call to action, perhaps a call to attention. You may want to connect the issue back to community impact or a community story. What you want to avoid is just simply saying what you said at the beginning and having that be your closeout. Editors don't need a summary and readers don't want a summary of what you had just said, but rather restate your thesis in a way that adds those points that I had just mentioned to leave people figuring out where to go next with what you're saying. And some quick submission tips that I just want to make note of that I have mentioned some of them, but just want to reiterate. So follow the outlet's guidelines. When you're submitting an LTE, you want to check for word count, which is around that 150 to 250 range. Formatting, some will have you submit it as a copy and paste into like a email. Some will have you submit it via a form, and they usually have very clear instructions on how to do that. And you want to be timely. Even a great letter may not run if the news cycle has moved on. Include your full contact info. So when you're sending your email, sharing your letter to the editor, you want to have your name, your phone, your email, so they can contact you if they need. And then a short 1 to 2 sentence bio of who you are. You do not need to be an expert in your field at all to submit an LTE. But if you have relevance to what you're talking about within your work or your experiences, it is helpful to have that listed. So keep that in mind. And then it's important to use a clear subject line, letter to the editor on Supreme Court NEPA ruling. That's just a random example, but it's very clear what your letter to the editor is on with the subject. Again, aim for 150, 250 words, aim for timeliness. Next slide. And so if you get published, amazing work, because that means your voice has entered the public conversation, and both Mothers Out Front and the Rachel Carson Council want to let your work travel. So we want to help leverage. So share it on LinkedIn, social media, email us, let us know in some shape or form, so that way we can find a way to spread the word of your great work. And then do it again, write another one, keep getting published. And, part of the game is not getting published too. Welcome to the club, because every writer has more rejections than bylines. It's just how it works. So persistence is really the skill to this. And writing LTEs is about that practice, that timing, that clarity. And when you line those three up, that's what makes a successful LTE. With that being said, with that really fast speed summary of LTEs, I want us to practice and spend time just chatting with each other and searching for an LTE you may want to write. So Joy just dropped in the chat an LTE general writing guide, and then a Make a Polluters Pay LTE example and template. So for the last like 10-ish, 15 minutes, what we're going to do is I will encourage y'all to open both documents, peruse through them, and then find a news source that you want to be published in. It can be super local, hyper local, it could be national, and start looking at what pieces exist out there, what you want to reply to, and start drafting an LTE, perhaps with the LTE Make Polluters Pay guide that we have. And yeah, we'll go from there. So if anyone has questions, additional comments, throw them in the chat, shout it out here. We'll be quick to answer.
I will very quickly add, remember, an LTE is very short and it's fundamentally responding to something. If you cannot find a climate article anywhere in the outlet and you've tried and tried, you can presumably respond to like the current event of, the climate damages that we're experiencing and seeing. You can pick a current event to respond to, and that is usually acceptable as well. I will also add that the opinion section is the most read section of news articles and outlets. So there definitely is credence to doing this approach to advocacy. So best of luck.
Hi, I have like a general question for the group. And when going about framing this, how would you go about without sounding, I would say, like condescending? Because I feel like when trying to draft something, I don't know if I'm in my own head or if it's the way that I'm trying to read it out loud. It's like, how do I feel like not a matter of fact type of, I guess, instigation, or is that kind of like the point?
Can I start? Um, I guess thank you for that question, Alia. But so one way I go about it is as if I were explaining this to my nephew. I know that simplifies things so much, but that's usually how I like to start after my hook once I'm stating that fact. And then, trying to unpack it. So, do you have any example in mind that where you've struggled and maybe I could speak to that?
I guess, I mean, that's a good point, I would say. I guess I'm just trying to find the tone. Um, I'm thinking about in relation to climate, Congress has been kind of stalling with the Momnibus Act, which is like a package of like Black maternal health and 12 other bills within it that will help,
Yeah, yeah,
support Black moms and support moms. And climate
yeah,
is one of those aspects. And so I'm trying to find a
yeah,
way to, nothing's really come out immediate. But,
yeah,
I know it was proposed, like get it out within 24, 48 hours of, when
yeah.
framing this, when I'm thinking of this in my head, like, how do I not sound so accusatory or I told you so, but trying to find a good like tone. But I guess, like picking framing someone like an audience in mind, like your nephew, I guess is like a good way to start.
Yeah, yeah, especially with intense topics. And then Yale Communications also came up with this research that said if you're too accusatory, that article doesn't end up getting read. So,
Right, right,
yeah, exactly. So as much as I would like to scream and shout, I want to go on the loudspeaker and be like, I told you so. We've been saying this since so long, but I don't think that's the way forward, unfortunately. And so I think just my primary, each time I write now, my primary audience like will be like my nephew. And then I start adding more science to it and like, depending on who I'm trying to say what to, simple hooks, but eye-catching and then sort of backing it up with science. But trying to balance that, I'd say. And it's a very important topic, the one that you're referring to, and it's difficult to write without, feeling so passionately about it.
right.
So, but I'll pass on the mic to somebody else who wants to speak.
Thank you.
I can very quickly chime in, and of course, our other panelists or anyone on the call can chime in. But I think that it's this very delicate balance of wanting to acknowledge the counter argument and do that rhetorical debate strategy of like, well, yes, everything's very stalled in Congress right now, and we can understand why. Or, well, yes, we're having a state budget crisis, so it might be difficult to spend on climate. But I run into the issue of like, this feels like I'm defending polluters right now. This feels like I'm defending elites and
Right,
institutionalists.
right,
So it's like this huge wall that I also hit. So thank you for raising it. But if there's a way to speak to your nephew, be civil, be kind, and defeat them with logic, I do think logic and argument is on our side in all of these cases.
It, especially right now, writing about climate needs you to be so patient. Like, and we shouldn't, I don't know, it's just a trick. It sucks. I feel you.
At least for me, I think sometimes I forget how like there's just some words that are so common and familiar to me, but to others mean something completely else. Like I'm working with this consulting group right now, and my boss, when she was giving me my tasks, she kept saying environmental health science, and to me that means something completely else from like thinking about like the actual environment in a hospital. I was thinking environmental health in terms of like climate change and that kind of stuff. So just realizing that people have they use words differently than you do is something that like I took me a little while to understand. Or even just like explaining to someone the word climate, sometimes they take that completely different. They don't think about like earth climate. They think about like political climate or something like that. So I think sometimes just like rereading my work and just thinking like, am I using jargon that's really common to me but not common to someone else that could like, you know, get them confused or lose their focus.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that of like bringing concise with language. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be very important in my experience. Sorry, I won't take a lot of time, but yes, because we're too stuck in the jargon. So like people like my people back home, like they have their own verbiage for climate change, and how they're experiencing it. So if I tell something to them in words that they use is so much more relatable to them compared to saying, oh, adaptation versus mitigation, you know? So maybe step zero before this op-ed could be like, I don't know, talking to people, trying to see like, hey, how do you interpret this? What do you think is causing this heat wave or whatever?
That's really helpful. Thank you guys.
It looks like we have an additional question in the chat, so I'd like to read it out loud if anyone wants to hop in and answer. Max asked, how would you recommend balancing lived experience with historical context leading up to the moment we're addressing? I'm guessing they meant for the story to be timely.
I guess I don't know if what I do is the right approach or not, but one way I like to tackle this is I tell what the current story is, and then I'll have a subsection or something like I'll segue and say, oh, and this is nothing new. So then blah 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 blah. This was happened for say the Clean Air Act, and so I listed everything in my blog, like I listed everything that was happening right now, and that's harmful to our health. And then I said, but in the past we have experience of dealing it. Then I shared some history about how the Clean Air Act came to be, and then I said, yeah, but we're defunding all of that as well. So I don't know if that's the right way, but yeah, you got to find your moment where you think that historical sort of evidence is going to make it's going to add like some spice to your op-ed.
Yeah, I was just gonna agree with you, Manishi. I think also, especially in current day and age, I find that sometimes the only way people can connect with things is if they can find the story to be relatable to them. And sometimes starting off with like the history can be, I'm just thinking about like even my friends who are not interested in climate, when I would tell them more of like lived experiences and how like those lived experiences need to change, they're more interested in than me explaining to them like the historical context. So sometimes you just need to start off with the lived experience to get their interest, sort of like Manishi was saying, and then bring in the historical context. Um, Especially in like this day and age where everybody has really short attention spans. So like starting off with the history can sometimes just like get people to click off. Unfortunately, like I enjoy it, but like most people unfortunately don't.
Yeah, it's usually when people are like, oh, so if we're in this, like we're in knee deep trouble, what can we do? Oh, well, we've done it in the past. Here's what worked for us, and but yeah, we're just hell bent on not doing it again. So
Yeah, I think a good example of that is like the New York City subway flooding. Like that's a story that gets a lot of people like engaged, and that's because they're personally experiencing the flooding. Like everybody, no matter of like socioeconomic status or whatever, they're experiencing the flooding, but because they have to take the subway. Um, so sometimes we might start off with like the historical context of like this happened like in Hurricane Sandy, which wasn't that long ago. But my point is, um, sometimes just starting off the story by saying like, "Oh, you're waiting for the train and it's 20 minutes away because the train is flooded," gets them to think like, "Okay, the MTA needs to do something about this." I hope that was your question, Max, and we weren't just on a tangent.
No, I mean that's been very helpful in the context. Like I like lived in Lower Manhattan during Hurricane Sandy, and I remember like the route I'd walk to school with my brother was completely changed just from the 6 foot storm surge and debris, and even within like the heart of like the financial capital, just seeing everything shut down, infrastructure, public infrastructure wise, and how it affected, lived experience, like balancing that type of lived experience with the failure of infrastructure and nature-based solutions to like install better safeguards for climate resilience. It can feel frustrating to try to fit all of that in when you only have 250 words, but you're trying to get at the heart of some of the structural issues that lead to these, yeah, disproportionate outcomes. So it is helpful to
Exactly.
hear that balance.
There's always so much to say and just not enough time is what I've learned. So,
Well,
but I think
always.
also with practice, sorry, Manishi, but just with practice, it gets easier, I think. Like the more you write them.
Yeah, that I was gonna say that, but Max, for your example, then, I would just write 2 lines about like bad, it's bad. But was it always bad? Are there other cities? Is it New York that's grappling with this problem? Are there other cities? And then, oh, then what has been done? What have we been doing? Are there other American cities? What are they doing? Sort of, then you frame that argument. But it becomes, I struggle with this. I'm not an expert, but I can tell you from experience because usually you start out by writing lengthy pieces of blogs or articles and stuff, and then it goes through heavy editing and things. So the key is to start. Just start writing. Doesn't matter.
Thank you.
All right, we are at 9 p.m. here, so I think we're going to hopefully, if anyone has further questions, first off, please put them in the chat. Let's continue the conversations. If you have questions after this call, please let's all stay connected. But we are going to move on now. So I think I'm handing it back over to either Liz or Joy here.
Yeah, I am happy to close us out. Thank you so much for taking the time to practice with us, and also asking those questions. It's important for everyone to hear for sure. So I just want to quickly share how you can get involved. For Mothers Out Front, you can volunteer with Mothers Out Front. I actually see a lot of our volunteers in the audience tonight. But if you're if you're not engaged with Mothers Out Front, here's a QR code if you want to scan it with your phone. Otherwise, you can follow us on our socials. And then please follow the Rachel Carson Council on their social medias. We've got their Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn here. So be sure to find them. And then thank you. Thank you so much to the Rachel Carson Council. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you to our moderators. And thank you for everyone for attending and taking the time. Okay, it looks like Layla dropped her email in the chat. Yep, and we've got some resources there. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your time. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, everyone.